We are presented with a false choice.
Mhm.
It is essentially a binary that has monopolized the modern intellectual landscape for the better part of the century, and frankly, it has paralyzed the inquisitive mind. On one side, we're offered the option of blind, mythical superstition, right? Of faith that seemingly requires the suspension of critical faculties, asking us to ignore the evidence of our eyes in favor of a comforting fable. On the other side,
On the other side, we are offered the cold, purposeless nihilism of a mechanical universe, a cosmos where meaning is a hallucination and biology is just a happy accident.
exactly. And the text we are analyzing today, Divine Plan and the Fossil Record by J.R. Ahmed, rejects this binary entirely.
It is a suffocating dichotomy. You either choose the heart and lose the head, or you choose the head and lose the soul. The text posits what we might call a third way. It introduces the framework of the sovereign intellect.
Yes, and we must define this with absolute precision before we proceed. The sovereign intellect is not an apologetic stance. It is an aggressive structural argument. It suggests that faith is not a leap into the dark, but the unavoidable conclusion of rigorous logic.
Right.
It argues that if you follow the evidence of the physical world, specifically the fossil record, to its absolute limit, you do not arrive at atheism. You arrive at tawhid, or the absolute oneness of the Creator. It is not an emotional crutch. It is a structural necessity.
And the mission of this deep dive is to apply that sovereign intellect framework to one of the most formidable weapons in the atheist arsenal, the argument from extinction. We are not dealing with the problem of evil in the abstract, philosophical sense of human suffering here. We are dealing with the problem of waste, the accusation of the bungling tinkerer.
It is a heavy accusation. The text opens with a profound, almost haunting image, the trilobite sleeping in a bed of crushed stars. It forces us to confront the silence of the fossil record. If there is a grand designer, why is the history of this planet a graveyard? The scientific consensus is that 99% of all species that have ever lived are gone.
That statistic is the absolute cornerstone of the prosecution's case. 99%. Their throats are filled with dust, their wings are pressed into slate. Is this the work of a perfect architect? Or is it evidence of clumsy experimentation? The aesthetic tragedy of it resonates deeply. Is the creator merely tinkering, trying to find a viable model, and discarding the failures in the strata of the earth?
That is the central question we are exploring for you today. To deconstruct this, we must first define our terms. The text weaponizes specific Islamic concepts as logical tools. We have the Khalifah, the trustee or administrator of the system. We have fitra, the internal logic gate or natural inclination. And we have Sunnat Allah, the immutable laws of nature.
These are not merely theological labels. They are the axioms upon which this defense is built. Khalifah implies that the human being is not a passive observer, but an active participant with agency in the tapestry of existence. Fitra implies that our cognitive hardware is pre-tuned to a specific frequency of truth. And Sunnat Allah implies that the universe runs on laws that do not change. Gravity, entropy, evolution. If we are to understand the argument, we must understand the machinery.
Let us begin with the indictment, the prosecution's case. The text cites the late Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. Their argument is rooted entirely in the concept of inefficiency.
It is a compelling argument on the surface. Hitchens was a master of rhetoric. He famously argued that if humanity is the intended target of creation, the climax of the story, then the process to get here was absurdly inefficient. He notes that for roughly 98,000 years of human existence, heaven watched with indifference. No revelation, no prophets, just death and survival.
The quote the text highlights is scathing. Hitchens says, "If it was done for us, it was done in the most inefficient, wasteful, cruel, and bungling manner." He uses the word bungling deliberately. It implies incompetence. It implies a creator who is trying and failing over and over again.
And Dawkins adds the layer of aesthetic and moral horror. He describes the universe as exhibiting pitiless indifference. The mechanism of this history is death. Starvation, predation, asteroid impacts. It is a palace of bones built to house a single breath. The argument is that a benevolent, omnipotent engineer would not design a system where survival necessitates agony.
This is where the logical paradox arises. The atheist looks at the dinosaur, which ruled the Earth for 165 million years, only to be wiped out by a rock from space. To the materialist, this looks like trial and error. It looks like the tinkerer analogy. The creator is figuring it out as he goes. He builds a prototype, it fails, he scraps it.
And if that is the case, there is no divine plan. There is only random chance and the brutal friction of geology. This is the indictment. It is not just that God is cruel. It is that he is fundamentally bad at his job.
This shifts the burden of proof to the defense. We must now enter section 2 of our analysis, the logic of limit. The text begins by completely dismantling the very premise of waste.
This is a critical philological and economic distinction. Waste is a concept derived entirely from scarcity. I can waste water because I have a limited supply. I can waste time because I am mortal.
Exactly. But the theological axiom here is that the Creator is Al-Ghani, the self-sufficient. The text uses a powerful metaphor here, which we need to unpack, the metaphor of the geometric constant.
Yes, think of God as the uncaused cause, similar to the number 1 in mathematics. Without the concept of 1, the entire number system collapses into incoherence. But more importantly, for an infinite being, the cost of production is 0. Creating a billion galaxies is no more expensive to the infinite than creating a single atom.
Therefore, the economic argument collapses. You cannot accuse a being of waste if their resources are inexhaustible. The atheist looks at the fossil record and sees a trash heap. The sovereign intellect looks at the same record and sees plenitude. It is a gallery of exhaustless creativity.
It reframes the extinction of species not as a loss of capital, but as a manifestation of capacity. But there is a deeper structural argument here regarding the system itself. The text references Surah al-Mulk, verses 3 and 4.
You do not see in the creation of the Most Merciful any inconsistency. The Arabic term is tafawut. And then it challenges us to look for futur, breaks or rifts in the structural integrity.
The distinction the text draws here is vital. The atheist points to a dead dinosaur, which is the result, and calls it a flaw. The Quran points to the mechanism, the laws of gravity, entropy, and ecology that cause the death, and it identifies that mechanism as the perfection.
A crucial distinction must be made here. This shifts the burden of proof from the result to the mechanism. The mechanism works with absolute precision. If an asteroid hits the Earth, the laws of physics dictate the impact. If the climate changes, the laws of biology dictate extinction. There is no break in the chain of cause and effect.
Exactly. The system is functioning perfectly according to its design parameters. The humbled sight mentioned in the verse is the rational admission that the machine is flawless, even if the output, the death of a species, is terrifying to the human observer.
This leads us directly into the epistemic gap. The text argues that the charge of inefficiency is essentially an argument from ignorance.
It references the verse, "Perhaps you hear a thing and it is good for you." In a cosmological context, this is the greater good hypothesis. We see the death of a star as a violent, destructive event. The system sees the creation of carbon, which is the absolute prerequisite for biological life.
We see a mass extinction event. The system sees an ecological reset necessary for the rise of mammals. We are judging a 14 billion year process by a single frame. The text utilizes the metaphor of the architectural blueprint here to illustrate this systemic logic.
This is a brilliant structural analogy. The laws of physics and extinction are the load-bearing walls of the universe. The Quran or the Revelation is the architectural intent, the blueprint that explains why the house was built in the first place.
And the argument is that you cannot judge the stability of a wall just by looking at the dust from the construction site. The atheist sees the dust, the fossils, the debris, and assumes the building is collapsing. The architect knows the dust is merely a byproduct of the wall being raised.
But we must address the emotional weight of death here. The text brings up the law of cessation or the universal law of mortality, referencing Surah Al-Imran 3, verse 185. Every soul shall taste death.
This establishes that the atheist premise rests on a hidden fallacy, the assumption that a perfect God must create permanent forms.
This is the error of gurur, or delusion. Expecting the testing ground to function like the eternal abode is a category error. The text argues that extinction is the metabolism of the planet.
I want to repeat that because it is structurally significant for you to understand. Extinction is metabolism.
Yes, it is recycling. If species did not die, the biosphere would have reached static saturation billions of years ago. The Earth is a finite container. For the divine play of creation to continue, the old must yield to the new.
So if a species lives for 50 million years and then dies, it has not failed. It has completed its term. It's a jaw. It was a functional, necessary component of the metabolic process of the Earth.
Which brings us to the nature of that process. The atheist calls it trial and error. Section 4 of our analysis challenges this directly.
The myth of trial and error. The argument is that branching evolution, the complex tree of life with all its dead ends, implies a confused creator, a tinkerer.
But trial and error implies an attempt to fix a mistake. The text argues that the branching nature of evolution is actually evidence of resilience and redundancy. In high-level systems engineering, you do not build a single fragile pathway. You build multiple branching pathways to ensure the system survives catastrophic change.
The text deploys the metaphor of the optical mirror here to explain the diversity of life.
The optical mirror. Human intelligence, or rather, the universe itself, is a mirror. A mirror does not create light. It reflects the object standing before it. The diversity of life, with its billions of forms, is a mirror reflecting the infinite intelligence of the Creator.
A mirror does not fail because it reflects a new image. It succeeds by displaying the capacity of the object. If the mirror only showed one image forever, it would suggest the object is static. But the object is infinite. Therefore, the reflections must be infinite.
And we must reclaim the dignity of those reflections. The text references Surah 6, verse 38, communities like you.
This is a profound shift in perspective. The atheist views the trilobite as a failed prototype for the human, a stepping stone that was discarded due to inefficiencies.
The Quranic view is that the trilobite was a community. It had a life. It worshipped through its existence. It fulfilled its purpose. To God, a species that exists for 50 million years and vanishes is a success. It is only to the human industrialist, obsessed with linear progress, that it looks like a failure.
We are moving from industrial efficiency to infinite expression. But we still have to deal with the timeline. Section 5 addresses the inefficiency of the timeline.
The 13.8 billion year wait. If we are the goal, why the massive delay?
The text invokes the relativity of the divine scale. It cites verses where a day is like 1,000 years or 50,000 years.
The logical corollary is that time is a variable, not a constant. Waiting is a human anxiety born of mortality. We hate waiting because our time is running out. The eternal has no such constraint.
To the eternal, 13.8 billion years is the twinkling of an eye. But the text goes further. It argues for cosmological necessity. It uses the phrase, cooking the iron.
This is the scientific apology. Why wait? Because the physics required it. The universe began with hydrogen and helium. Life requires heavy elements, carbon, oxygen, iron. These elements are only created in the nuclear furnaces of stars.
The stars had to live, burn, and die. They had to burst like pomegranates, which is a beautifully poetic image, to scatter the seeds of our blood. The iron in your hemoglobin was forged in a star that died billions of years ago.
So the silence of those billions of years was not empty. It was a pregnancy. It was a gestational period. You cannot rush a pregnancy without killing the child. The timeline is simply the duration required for the laws of physics to produce the necessary substrate for life.
The text uses the metaphor of the signal and the receiver here.
Yes. The universe is the broadcast, the ayat, or signs. The timeline is simply the duration of the signal required to tune the receiver. The receiver is human consciousness. The signal has been broadcasting since the Big Bang, but the receiver needed 13.8 billion years of biological engineering to be built.
But what about the silent era? The prosecution argues that for 98,000 years of human history, heaven was indifferent. No Quran, no Bible, just silence.
The text rejects the premise of the silent era by invoking the first law. The argument is that guidance is an internal law, not just an external book.
It references Surah 35, verse 24. No nation but that there had passed within it a warner. But more importantly, it defines fitra as the internal logic gate.
This is crucial. The first humans were not abandoned. They possessed the primordial covenant. The fitra is pre-installed software designed to recognize the divine. The early human, looking up at the stars or dealing with the moral weight of their tribe, had access to the face of the Lord through their own internal construction.
So the Quran is not the start of the conversation. It is the summation. The dialogue began the moment the first human mind attained sentience.
Precisely. To say heaven was indifferent is to ignore the internal reality of the human being.
We must now make a crucial distinction. We have been defending the natural extinction of the past, but we are currently living through the sixth extinction, Section 6, the test of stewardship.
This differentiates divine extinction from human destruction. The text references Surah al-Mulk again, created death and life to test you.
The test requires the possibility of loss. This is a terrifying logical necessity. If the world were unbreakable, if we could not destroy species, then the Khalifah, the trustee, would have no moral agency.
Exactly. If I give you a glass vase that cannot break, your carefulness means nothing. If I give you a fragile vase, your stewardship is tested. The universe is fragile so that our love and our choices can be real.
The text introduces the narrative of Khidr and Moses from Surah Al-Kahf, specifically the scuttled ship.
This is a sophisticated theological application. In the story, Kidra scuttles a ship, damages it deliberately to save it from a king who seizes every functioning vessel.
The paradox is that the damage is the salvation.
The text argues that natural extinction is the scuttling that preserves the balance. It recycles resources. However, human-caused extinction is the violation of the mezan, the balance.
So when we wipe out a species through greed or negligence, that is not divine will in the sense of approval. It is a recorded failure of the steward.
And the text reminds us that the animals are part of the resurrection. Communities like you, justice is absolute. The extinction we cause is written in the ledger against us.
This leads us to the final section of our analysis, Section 7, Evolution as Ascent. The text connects extinction to the rise of consciousness.
It references Surah 17, verse 70. Preferred them over much of what we have created. This preference is the intellect.
The argument is that extinction is biological scaffolding.
Yes. Think of a cathedral. You build scaffolding to construct the arch. Once the keystones are in place, the scaffolding is removed. The text argues that the previous epochs of life, the dinosaurs, the megafauna, were the biological scaffolding necessary to create the specific ecological window for the intellect to emerge.
We stand on the bones of the past, not out of cruelty, but because their existence prepared the soil for us.
And this marks the shift from natural selection to intellectual sovereignty. For billions of years, life was driven by the environment. With the arrival of the Khalifah, we have a being that can drive the environment. We can prevent extinction. We can cure disease.
We're the only species that can say, I understand.
And that is the final causality. The fossil record is not a graveyard of failures. It is the foundation of the Great Ascent.
Let us synthesize this. We have unpacked the logic. What is the profound realization?
The sovereign intellect forces us to reject the bungling tinkerer model entirely. The universe is not a factory designed for the efficient production of widgets. If it were, it would be a failure.
It is a kingdom of infinite expression and rigorous law.
The text closes with an aesthetic judgment. It references Surah 55, verse 27. There will remain the face of your Lord. This is the only permanent reality. The turning of the pages, the extinction of species, is not a flaw in the book. It is the mechanism of the story.
Trilobite did not die in vain. It died to turn the page.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the silence of the fossil record is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of a library. It is filled with the record of a creator who is al-Wasi, all-encompassing.
It is a heavy realization. We are not accidents on a lonely rock. We are the inheritors of a 14 billion-year legacy of rigorous construction.
And that brings a terrifying weight.
Indeed. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought, derived from our analysis today. If the universe was scuttled and rebuilt over billions of years, if stars were murdered to make your blood, if 99% of all life was allowed to perish just to produce a mind capable of recognizing its creator,
then what is the weight of the responsibility that rests on your shoulders right now?
that is the question. We have touched upon the indictment, but we must dissect it further. The argument from inefficiency is not merely about time. It is about the very architecture of suffering. When Dawkins speaks of the Palace of Bones, he is invoking a visceral reaction to the mechanism of natural selection.
He is highlighting the friction of existence. Evolution, by definition, is a grinder. It requires pressure to shape life. If there were no predators, no starvation, and no competition, there would be no adaptation. The gazelle only becomes fast because the cheetah is fast. The logic of the system is predicated on conflict.
And the atheist looks at this conflict and sees cruelty. They ask, could an omnipotent God not create a world without this friction?
This brings us to the concept of the best of all possible worlds. The Islamic theological position, often associated with Al-Ghazali, is that this world, with its flaws and friction, is the perfect setting for the specific purpose of the imtihan, the test.
If you remove the friction, you remove the test. If you remove the danger, you remove the courage. If you remove the mortality, you remove the urgency.
Precisely. The atheist imagines a world of static bliss and calls it better. But a world of static bliss produces no character, no history, and no triumph. It is a nursery for infants, not a kingdom for Khalifahs.
So the inefficiency is actually the necessary complexity required to forge a moral being.
It is the forge. You cannot blame the fire for being hot if the goal is to make a sword.
Let us return to the epistemic gap and the law of cessation. The text mentions that expecting the testing ground to function like the eternal abode is a category error. This is a profound logical fallacy that permeates modern thought.
It is the fallacy of misplaced expectations. We treat the earth as if it were paradise. We try to eliminate all suffering, all death, all inconvenience. And when we fail, because the system is designed to include these things, we blame the architect.
We're like guests in a hotel complaining that we cannot remodel the room. The room is temporary. It is designed for transit.
The Quran is very specific about this. Ad-dunya is derived from dana, meaning low or close. It is the lower reality. Al-akhirah is the ultimate reality. The atheist collapses these two into one. They want paradise here.
And because they cannot find paradise here, because they find death and extinction instead, they conclude there is no God.
It is a tragedy of perspective. They are judging the bridge by the standards of the palace.
And regarding the metabolism of the planet, this concept deserves more scrutiny. The recycling of matter is absolute. Every atom in your body was once part of something else.
It connects to the attribute of al-Mu'id, the restorer. God creates and he restores. The cycle of life and death is the mechanism of this restoration. The dinosaur dies, its carbon returns to the soil, the plant absorbs the carbon, the mammal eats the plant. It is a continuous flowing river of existence.
To stop the flow, to prevent extinction, would be to stagnate the river. It would be death by other means.
Exactly.
The cooking of the iron in Section 5 needs to be understood in its full cosmological context. The text argues that the 13.8 billion years were a pregnancy.
Let us look at the physics. Nucleosynthesis. The universe starts with simple protons. To get to the complexity of a DNA molecule, you need chains of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. These are heavy, complex atoms.
You cannot just wish them into existence in a causal universe.
You have to bake them. The stars are the ovens. The pressure inside a star is immense. It forces atoms to fuse. But even that isn't enough. To get them out of the star has to die.
The supernova.
A supernova is one of the most violent events in physics. It outshines entire galaxies, but without that violence, the universe remains sterile gas. The violence is the delivery mechanism.
So when Hitchens says the universe was indifferent or empty for billions of years, he is ignoring the work being done in the furnace.
He's looking at a factory floor while the machines are running and asking, where's the product? The product is being made, wait for the assembly to finish.
And we are the product.
We are the beneficiaries of that labor. The signal and receiver metaphor reinforces this. The signal wasn't just waiting. The signal was guiding the formation of the receiver. The laws of physics were steering the evolution of the cosmos toward a state where consciousness could emerge.
This is the anthropic principle, weaponized by the sovereign intellect.
It is the strong anthropic principle. The universe appears to be fine-tuned not just for life, but for observers.
We discussed biological scaffolding. I want to push this further. The text implies that the rise of the intellect was the teleological goal of the entire evolutionary process.
Teleology, the study of purpose. Modern biology is allergic to this word. They say evolution has no direction. But the text argues that if you look at the trajectory from single cells to multicells, from cold-blooded to warm-blooded, from instinct to intellect, there is an undeniable vector.
The vector is towards awareness.
The vector is towards marifa, knowledge of the divine. The rock glorifies God by being a rock. The tree glorifies God by growing. But the human glorifies God by knowing.
And to reach that level of knowing, the biological substrate had to be perfect. The brain had to be complex enough to hold the concept of infinity.
And that complexity took 4 billion years of biological research and development. The extinction events were the editing process. They pruned the tree. They removed the branches that were not leading to the goal.
So the dinosaur was not a mistake. It was a necessary branch that supported the tree for a time, and then was pruned to allow light to reach the lower branches, the mammals.
Precisely. The preference mentioned in Surah 17, verse 70, is the preference of function. We were given the keys to the car.
And now we are driving.
And we're driving fast on a road we barely understand.
We have deconstructed the argument. We have seen that waste is a human economic fallacy. We have seen that inefficiency is actually structural necessity. We have seen that death is metabolism.
We have dismantled the bungling tinkerer and revealed the sovereign intellect.
But this leaves us with the final, quiet weight of the conclusion. If we are not accidents,
if we are the intended result,
when we are observed,
and we are accountable. The third way is not just a way of thinking, it is a way of being. It demands that we act with the dignity of the Khalifah.
We cannot hide behind the excuse of nihilism anymore. We cannot say, nothing matters, so I can do what I want.
That escape hatch has been welded shut by the logic of the fossil record.
The trilobite sleeping in the crushed stars is not a symbol of meaninglessness, it is a witness.
It is a witness that the system works. And now the system is waiting for you to do your part.